Welcome back. Beyond the Box Score, we got a new intro because we are shifting into regular season content here. Very exciting. No Dan Schneider today. I'm going to do my best impression here for the plug god. I already miss him. But we've got a very exciting show here. Shout out Austin Lim, too, for the fan-made intro. Just like so much fun to have the peak nerdiness there. I kind of do miss the TV and the 8-bit soundtrack, but definitely like changing it up here to usher in the new season. Okay, so what we've got here today, I'm very, very excited for this, is Mastering Matchups is going to be the name of it here. Ryan and I have talked about that, try to find the right name for it. Our guy, Scott Barrett, CEO over at Fantasy Points Data, suggested Masters in Matchups, to which I replied, we are on the path to mastery. We're inviting anyone to join us on that path. We don't presume to be masters yet. And that really leads me to our guest today, JM to Win. If you guys like my work, you're going to love JM's work and everything that his team is doing over at oneweekseason.com. No cap, this is 100% the person that I emulated the most when I was learning to do this work 10-ish years ago, trying to figure out how to do the research the right way. Just a tremendous amount of respect for the work that he does, and honored to have him as our guest today. It only felt like the right step in the Mastering Matchups journey for me and my lovely co-host Ryan here to be able to pick James' brain. I don't think Ryan's going to need much introduction. Surely you guys, if you know me, know Ryan. I reference Ryan basically every podcast. He's one of the few fantasy analysts, these two right here, one of the few whose work I regularly read because I do trust their work. And so this is really just a treat to me. Thank you guys both so much for being here. Ryan, I'm going to throw it to you in a moment so you can share your screen and show our YouTube audience some of the stuff we're going to get into here on this show, some of the schedule adjusted fantasy points per game matchup charts and stuff like that. A lot of really cool stuff powered by the Fantasy Points Data Suite. So I'll have you talk our audience through exactly what they're looking at today and what they can expect on the show every Thursday. But first, I've got to throw it to JM. JM, I definitely want you to tell the people about OWS. But first, I got to know, how are you, my man? I feel like every year during this time, you've got to be just are you getting enough sleep? That's basically my question. How are you?
Well, yeah. Today? So I've got a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old now, and my wife and the kids, they go out of town for these 2 weeks leading up to the season. So during this stretch, it's kind of around the clock work, but sleep gets in there. It's more once we get to weeks 3 and 4, we've got soccer practice and my son's doing go-karting now, and we got dance and family stuff and all this grinding. That's where, I'll go a good 3 months with 4 hours of sleep a night. But we're catching up before that, and then we'll catch up after that.
No one is more dedicated. Please tell them about all that is going into the work over there at OWS. Why are you not sleeping? It's because you're pumping out ridiculous amounts of content.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the intro and the plaudits. It's fun having been in this space for so long, because I'd forgotten this, but Scott, before Scott had 200 followers on X, and he sent me a message back in 2014, picking my brains about stuff in DFS. And then you look up a few years later, and Scott's lapped me in terms of name recognition and how good he is at all this stuff. And so it's cool to have had this time in this space. Obviously, I don't really have a concept of where my name stands in all this, because I'm in my own hibernation bubble, right? And that's why my follower count, I think I've been on 23,000 followers on X for 6 years now. It doesn't really grow since I left Roto Grinders, where I had that extra exposure. But that's also kind of part of what makes OWS special, is that I do everything in my own bubble. And then we have other guys who are also super sharp. Hilo, who spent a lot of time doing stuff with Fantasy Points, and Mike Johnson and Zandamir. And we all are kind of in our own bubbles doing our own thoughts and our own research. And that allows us to have unique perspectives, which is one of the best things we can find in DFS, is unique perspectives. So I won't go too deep into what OWS is beyond just mentioning that every year we make 1 week season free in week 1. And we do that because our whole thought process at OWS is that DFS is about so much more than understanding the matchups. It's about understanding how to put those players together onto a roster that maximizes your chances of first place finishes, maximizes your ROI. And so it's a strategy game. It's a game of game theory and strategy and outsmarting your opponents. And so we do all the deep dives into the content and what are the best matchups and best players and all that, but then also use that as an opportunity to teach people how to play DFS. And so because of our approach being kind of unique and different, we always say, like, we're not a site for everybody, but because we tailor it to the people that we're for, we tend to really be for those people. So we like to make the site free week 1 so that you can come check it out, see if it's a fit for you. If it's not, you'll know pretty quickly. You move on to a site that is a fit for you. And if it is a fit for you, it's probably different from what you found in other places, which we think is really cool.
Yeah, definitely go check that out. Ryan, welcome to Mastering Matchups. This is the show where three nerds today, walk you through all of the most important matchup data that your fantasy teams, your DFS lineups. We're definitely going to talk a lot of DFS today with JM, but we want to make it centered around just the matchups, the angles that we can, take to view these games. Like, what paths might this game go down? So that's a lot of, I think, what we'll probably talk about with JM today is like, how might this game play out? And if so, what might that mean? I think this is going to be a very cool show. It's powered by the Fantasy Points Data Suite, which you guys can access for yourself at data.fantasypoints.com. Ryan, can you show the people a bit of Fantasy Points data goodness? What are we looking at today?
Absolutely, I can. Yeah. So right up here on the screen right now, I have our coverage matrix. This is showing basically how much of every type of coverage shell each defense played last year. Obviously, so early in the season, this is going to require a lot of additional context and knowledge just in terms of which defensive coordinators have moved around the league, which ones are still there, which matchups still apply. But yeah, this is kind of the meat and bones where I spend a lot of my time during the season writing my advanced matchups column, which comes out every Friday morning over on Fantasy Points that people will be able to check out. But yeah, this is the Fantasy Points data suite. It's got basically everything data related you could possibly need to know. We have a huge team of charters that watch every single NFL game, actual ball knowers. So, we're not making all these mistakes and charting things incorrectly. Yeah, it's pretty awesome. You can see who played the most cover 3, which we might talk about at some point in the show. I just want a quick infomercial to show off a few of the other tables, but yeah, you can split out quarterbacks here in advanced passing by how they performed against every coverage shell. Here we've got Michael Penix against each shell in his sample last season. We've got stuff like pass rate over expectation. Here it is by offenses. Here it is by defenses. Going to be talking about pass funnels and game environments. That goes into this a ton. So yeah, and I'm only really scratching the surface here. So I do want to just implore everybody that if you're a fan of me, if you're a fan of Jacob, if you're into this show, love getting deep and nerdy into the matchups, definitely go over to data.fantasypoints.com. This show has its own promo code for those who have yet to subscribe to the Fantasy Points data suite. It is all caps matchups 15. That'll give you 15% off the data suite or any package over at Fantasy Points. Yeah, I think that's everything. Back over to you, Jacob.
Very cool. I mean, everybody here knows how much I love the data suite for sure. We've got in the comments, nobody knows what to expect week 1. It's kind of true, but we do have a lot of defensive coordinators who are, still here from last year. And then we have other ones like Lou Anarumo, who's moved to the Colts. We know, we have a long track record of what he likes to do. So that's why I've got Ryan and JM on here today. I thought they were 2 of the best that I could think of to help us kind of sift through all of this and make sense of what might be noise and what might actually be some signal for us. On that note, I want to just get into a few things before we go to break, and then we're going to dive into our first segment. The first thing I want to note is injuries. And if I miss anything that you guys think is relevant that you've seen, let me know. We're kind of early in the week. But Christian Gonzalez for the Patriots may miss week 1, it looks like, hamstring injury. That's one of the top corners in the NFL, one of the top cover corners. So that would be very significant. Bowers, Jacoby Myers, and just that game in general, that would, I think, boost the likelihood of it potentially turning into a shootout. For the Bucs, Vita Vea, DNP on Wednesday with a foot injury was added kind of unexpectedly there. So if he's out, that would be huge for Bijan Robinson and an Atlanta offensive line that's banged up. And then for the Packers, Nate Hobbs is listed as a starting quarterback. Not as significant as these first two names here with Vea and Christian Gonzalez, but is a starter, is their only starting quarterback listed at 5'10" or taller. So maybe this is an Isaac Tesla note. I just like to make everything about Tesla, honestly. But yeah, Hobbs had knee surgery during training camp, not practicing on Wednesday, so he might miss that game. And with that, I want to transition to a quick running back discussion, because as I looked at our show notes today, we gravitated a lot towards the passing games, which I think is the most fun and interesting part of matchups, but there's a lot going on the ground as well. And that can sometimes dictate things in a really, pronounced way where you're expecting things to come through the passing game. And then it's just, Chuba Hubbard 25 times. So the first one I wanted to bring up was Tyrone Tracy and the Giants. All three of these running backs, I think, are like, you could start them. You don't know what exactly to expect. They're probably not people that are going to be on radars for DFS. And so maybe they're interesting tournament plays. There's so many ways to get contrarian and strategical with the way that you approach week one, especially because people kind of gravitate towards a lot of the same players. Tyrone Tracy, I think I don't know if anybody's going to want to play the Giants, but if so, it's probably going to be Malik Nabers. I don't think people are going to really be on Tracy. You guys are more tuned into DFS. So if I ever say anything that is egregious and way off on roster percentages, please let me know. On Tracy, the note here is that the only team with a situation neutral opponent pass rate. So when the score of the game is within 7 points either way, how often did the opposing team pass? The only team with a rate below 50% last year was Washington, who returns the same defensive coordinators. I think all things equal, offenses choose to attack on the ground versus the Commanders. They had the fifth worst success rate allowed when looking at running back runs on defense. Only the Panthers allowed more yards before initial contact on running back runs than Washington last year. It was Carolina at 2.07, Washington at 2.02 yards before contact on running back runs, and no one else even close to that. So I think if the Giants are able to keep this close, they would prefer to probably attack on the ground. Washington did, improve their cornerback room. So that's probably the path of least resistance. Do you have any thoughts on Tracy? I think nobody really thinks about him.
No, I agree. I'm glad that he's a name you brought up here because this is kind of not defensive coordinator, but like a defensive leader type of tendency that I do think is going to carry into 2025. The Commanders' defense last year were by far the most extreme run funnel. Opponents averaged almost a -6% pass rate over expectation against them last year. And we actually saw the same thing when Dan Quinn was with the Cowboys over the previous two seasons. He has always pretty much presided over a top 3 run funnel. So I like what you're thinking here, Jacob. If it's going to be any week for Tyrone Tracy to see his biggest workload, it is probably in week 1, right after Cam Scatterbo missed most of the preseason. So yeah, I don't know that I'm getting like that excited in DFS, but in terms of like a kind of fringy flex week 1 start, I think Tracy is one of the better ones in those seasonal leagues.
Any thoughts, JM? Do you think that we could have a shootout here potentially?
Yeah, so I actually have a few thoughts here. So first I want to start with that, person who said we don't know anything week 1. And I think that it's better to lean toward that thought than to lean toward the thought that we know so much in week 1. But as with anything, the more nuance we can layer into our thoughts, the more we're going to benefit, right? And so there's this component of whether it's season long or DFS, the more we lean into the understanding that there are things we don't know week 1, the more we can use that to our advantage. And so it's not so much about we know so much week 1 or there's so much we don't know week 1, we don't know anything week 1. It's more about that middle ground of, yeah, there is a lot that we don't know. There are also things that we do know or things that we can make strong suppositions about, right? Like 2 years ago, if you were paying close attention, it was pretty clear that Puka Nacua was going to be the number 1 wide receiver for the Rams in week 1. He put up 24 something PPR points, right? Like this huge week 1 game. Nobody was rostering him in season-long leagues. Nobody had drafted him in best ball. Nobody was on him in week 1 DFS that week. He was sub 0.5% owned in DFS. But if you were paying attention, I started out with 15% Puka Nacua on my rosters that week. If you're paying attention, you can have a sense of these types of things, right? So it's this crossroads of like, what don't we know? What can we assume? And then also in the places where people don't know things, but they're assuming that they know things, where can we leverage that to our advantage? Carrying that over into this specific discussion with the Giants, So I really think that this game is being kind of misread in general in terms of like so I look at everything through the lens of DFS, but like where are people going to go this week when they're looking for that quarterback to click a button on where they feel like they're getting the most upside? It's going to be Jaden Daniels because like he's got the rushing upside. We're missing Josh Allen on this slate. We're missing Lamar Jackson on this slate. And Jaden Daniels is so good. And the Giants have this low win total. I think what people fail to realize is the Giants could have a really good defense this year. They probably have the top defensive line in all of football. You literally can't play the Giants and not double team Dexter Lawrence. But then what happens right now? You've got Kayvon Thibodeau, you've got Abdul Carter, you've got like all this juice from the Giants defensive line. And so that really throws a team into a bind. And so then we think of things in terms of, I think one of my biggest edges over the years has been thinking about how a coach is going to try to win a game. And so if you're the Giants, how are you going to try to win this game? You're going to try to make it kind of low scoring. And that means funneling things through Tyrone Tracy. So I do think that Tyrone Tracy in season-long leagues, you're talking, is he a top 24 back in week one where, most leagues you're getting 24 starting running backs. Like I would say, absolutely. He's a top 24 back in week one. And then even in terms of DFS, I think that there's this range of how much risk you take on and where the expected value is in that. But the larger the tournament field you're in, the more value there is in going towards somebody like a Tyrone Tracy who can put up 25, 28 PPR points. And if he's going to do it, this would be a good week for him to do it.
Yeah, that's kind of where my head's at. I've got him at RB24, so just behind RJ Harvey, who I'm very excited for, Tony Pollard, and Travis Etienne. I did want to quickly mention the Jacksonville running backs. Like the matchup is so good. Carolina thinks that their defense is going to be better, but I'm honestly not convinced. We'll get into that game just after our break here. But I did want to say I'm starting Etienne this week if I have him, and I've also got Tank Bigsby in the top 30. I think they're both high upside flex plays if you need to go that route. The last running back I wanted to mention just quickly, Alvin Kamara. This is just kind of a weird one. League low opponent first read target rate for the Cardinals last year. The Cardinals, I've actually been very intrigued by what Arizona has done schematically. They really don't let offenses get what they would like to. They kind of force them to do weird things, checkdowns and stuff like that. It has me a little bit worried about Chris Olave in this matchup. I think him and Rashid Shaheed could both get there. But it's just a weird defense. I think this has been maybe the least talented defense in the NFL lately. But they've still had some games where they give opposing offenses headaches, and they get an injection of off-season talent on the defensive side of things this past 2025 offseason. And so I'm looking at this and it's like, if Arizona is able to take away Kellen Moore's designed stuff and Spencer Rattler's first read is often not there, I think we're just going to see him check down a lot, maybe scramble a lot. And then also this defense is really easy to run on. So I do have Kamara as like a top. He's like in the same range as like Chuba Hubbard and Kenneth Walker and Devon Achane for me this week, which I don't like. I think all those are significantly better plays, but I think he's probably going to get a ton of volume. Let's take our first break, and then we'll get into our first segment, which is looking at some expected game flows and what these matchups might result in for us.
Get ready.
Wait a second. I thought we were going tubing.
All three Sonic the Hedgehog movies and Knuckles are now streaming on Paramount Plus.
And everyone loves it.
Every adventure.
Just try to keep up.
Every face-off.
This ends now.
And every moment that will have you saying,
Where have you been? My entire life!
It's showtime!
All three Sonic the Hedgehog movies and the entire Sonic universe are now streaming on Paramount Plus.
Alrighty, we are back. Ryan, I'm going to have you introduce these segments, if you would. I love the co-host Ryan here has prepared the show sheet, which is such a relief for me as the person who normally does that. What do we get to first here, Ryan?
Yeah, so first we're just going to kind of each pick the game environment that each of the three of us kind of most want to talk about or think is most important to think through or get right this week. So first, I'm going to throw it over to JM, and he wants to start us off with the Bucs and the Falcons. So yeah, you got the floor.
Yeah, so Bucs and Falcons, to me, if we played out this slate 100 times, which is how we should always think about things, because then we're thinking in terms of probabilities and positioning ourselves to benefit the most if we could have a large sample size. So we only get to see it play out once, but if we could play out this slate 100 times, I'm pretty confident that this Bucs and Falcons game would be the highest combined points more times than any other game on this slate. So a lot of that comes down to weapons, but also a lot of that just comes down to how these coaches try to win games. So what's really cool about these teams is you have two defensive head coaches, but on the Falcon side, you have a defense that's still putting things together. So Raheem Morris understands that they have to win through the offense. And then on the Bucs side, you have a coach in Todd Bowles who, like, the big knock against him is he blitzes way too much, regardless of whether he should or not. But this is this aggressive mindset where it's like, hey, no matter the opponent, no matter the situation, we're going to throw everything at the opponent. So what that leads to is you have these sort of games where either it becomes a back and forth affair, or the Bucs are able to make some big plays on defense early in the game, and then that force, they're still aggressive on offense when they do that. That forces the opponent to try to come back. I was looking at Baker Mayfield's top games last year, and a lot of them were in blowouts. And so a lot of times, in order to get a ceiling outcome from a player, you need a shootout, you need a back and forth affair, which is, I think, something that especially season-long players don't think about enough, is that game environment type of component where take out the thoughts on the individual player and just think, can this game produce a lot of points? Because touchdowns are our most asymmetric upside in terms of fantasy scoring. So Baker Mayfield, this Bucs passing attack, they're in a situation where they can put up points regardless of whether the Falcons keep things close or not, because that's how they like to play games. But then also this is a spot where the Falcons should be able to keep pace. And so I really like this game environment to take off. If Vita Vea doesn't play, that actually hurts the game environment a little bit, because another bonus of the Bucs is it's so hard to run against them that teams skew heavy pass rates against them. And so if Vita Vea is out, that actually dings this game a little bit, but boosts Bijan Robinson a little bit. But if Vita Vea plays in particular, I think that this is the game that really stands out to me in terms of where we're likely to get upside on this slate.
Yeah, and I think, to be clear, for people who are maybe new to thinking about it this way, it's like if Vea plays, then maybe the Falcons are less likely to lean on the run game or get in a game environment where they can just keep running. And so maybe that leads to more high-paced, back and forth type of passing type plays. If I can share my screen here, I've got like the blitz rates. And if you see a team highlighted, that means they retain their defensive coordinator. And if not, then they have a new defensive coordinator. You see that only Brian Flores Vikings blitzed more than the Bucs last year. A funny stat is that the Bucs had the lowest pressure rate when blitzing of any team, which is just very funny to me for a team that specializes in blitzing. So yeah, I'm definitely really intrigued about how this game might go, how this is going to affect Michael Penix. I dug into the data and really liked what I found for Darnell Mooney. Ryan, did you have anybody from this game? And if not, JM, I'm curious what kind of your specific targets are, how you're navigating this.
Yeah, I mean, I am all over Michael Penix in this game. It is the main thing. And it's for a few of the reasons that you guys have brought up already. Number one, should be a shootout conducive game environment, or if it's not, if it's the Falcons coming back in a negative game script, then that's exciting, right? I mean, both of these teams rank top 6 by pass rate over expectation allowed. Every kind of way that they play, as JM was explaining, is just conducive to shootouts. So that's great for Penix. You really want the Falcons to kind of take the leash off of Penix and not just go so Bijan Robinson run heavy like we had seen at some points last season. But I'm pretty optimistic. And then Penix also has some positive schematic notes. I had it up on the screen earlier. But with the Bucs doing all of this cover 3, all of these blitzes, Penix had pretty decent splits against both of those things last season. So I really like Penix. I mean, the early ownership projections are coming in fairly low for him compared to some of these other kind of cheaper end QBs. So yeah, he's going to be a very big stand for me on this slate.
Yeah, and I like that too with the Penix price tag in DFS is especially intriguing. And I'll also throw out there, Baker Mayfield, because he doesn't run, people don't think of him in this category. He had more DraftKings points per game than Jaden Daniels last year. He was 0.7 points shy of Joe Burrow last year. In his 14 games with Mike Evans last year, 14 healthy games, Evans got hurt partway through that game against the Ravens. But in his 14 healthy games with Mike Evans, he went for over 270 passing yards in 9 of those 14 games. And I think that people just, when we're talking about where there is certainty, right, and where there is uncertainty, this is one of the spots with the most certainty in terms of how these teams like to approach things. And, you show that blitz rate and the pressure rate, and you think about Penix having to deal with the blitz. It's like, what's great about preparing, you have weeks to prepare for week 1. You know what you're getting from Todd Bowles. You know what you're preparing your quarterback for. And so that helps a lot as well. And so, I think this is one of these game environments where, look, people say it now, right? Like, September is preseason now. These guys don't play a lot in preseason like they used to. All these teams are getting their feet under them. But this is one of those spots where if we're going to see like high scoring early in the season, this is one of the spots that's likeliest to have it.
For DFS purposes, I think Darnell Mooney is like one of the sexiest plays you can make this week because there are so many cheap receivers available this week. So like who in their right mind is clicking on Darnell Mooney when you don't even know how much he's going to play? So if he suits up, I definitely think he's viable. He absolutely crushed in this matchup last year, 32 and 19 PPR points in 2 games against the Bucs last year. And I think that the blitzing only helps. If you're going to leave yourself shorthanded on the back end, Darnell Mooney is an absolutely filthy route runner. So he could turn that into a big play at any given time. Anything else here, Ryan, or are we ready to move on to our next game?
No, I think we can kind of move on to our next game, and we can do my game next. So I am by far the most intrigued. I don't know if this is definitely like the best game environment, but I'm the most intrigued, especially from a DFS perspective, by this Lions and Packers game. So starting off with kind of the weirdest thing here that we didn't usually see last season is the Lions are 2.5 point underdogs. Their implied total is at just 22.5 points. They went over that in 15 of their 17 games last season. So this is Vegas really telling us, okay, we think Ben Johnson matters a lot. We think Frank Ragnow matters a lot. We don't think that this offense is going to maintain this historic pace that it was on last season, where they had averaged the most points per game of any team since the 2018 Chiefs. And I think that was like the 4th most touchdowns in NFL history or something absurd like that. So what all of this kind of means is, because Vegas is kind of down on the Lions, it is also creating these lower projections across the board and across the industry in this game, right? We know that this is an offense that can completely go off. We have seen that like kind of before Ben Johnson, Dan Campbell stepped in to call plays and like restored a level of competency to the offense that it hadn't had before. If you're of the mind, kind of like I am, that maybe Dan Campbell is more the key to the Lions running a lot of play action and doing all of the efficiency cheat code stuff.
That's interesting. I don't think I've heard this take from you. I don't want to derail us too much, but that's interesting.
Yeah, no, I mean, anyone can go check out my free kind of preseason breakdown of every new NFL play caller. But yeah, that take is kind of outlined in there, where you saw Jared Goff's play action rate really spike. What was it in 2021 when Campbell took over from Anthony Lynn in like week 5, it went from like they're doing no play action to, oh, suddenly it's like the Lions offense that we have known for the past few years. So yeah, kind of a cool little note. So I am I certain about it? No, but this is the type of thing in DFS where if I can get a Jahmyr Gibbs and Amon-Ra St. Brown at relatively depressed ownership in not only a shootout environment, but maybe even a negative game script for the Lions, which is incredible historically for both Gibbs and Amon-Ra, that gets pretty exciting to me. I guess on the other side as well, we have seen some kind of weird pass rate stuff back and forth from the Packers over the last few years. Generally, Matt LaFleur has been more on the pass heavy side of balance. Last year, they were much more on the run heavy side. I think a lot of that has to do with Jordan Love's injury, especially from week 8 on, with that groin injury stacking on. That was when we really saw their pass rates kind of crater. Coming out with Love at least healthier in week 1, he did have the non-throwing hand issue a few weeks ago, but assuming that this passing game is slightly healthier, then maybe the Packers are also pushing the pace a little bit. So yeah, especially St. Brown and Gibbs are kind of my big stands in this game, but I really do think this one could shoot out, and it's just not going to be as popular, especially in DFS, just because of how expensive a lot of the pieces are and how kind of difficult it is to stack.
JM, Packers Lions thoughts, please, because I am very curious about this one.
Yeah. I mean, this game has a broad range of outcomes to me. I think it's so, Heath mentioned the price tags. I think that this is worth thinking about, right? Mike Evans went for 22 or more DraftKings points in half his games last year, 7 out of 14. Amon-Ra St. Brown went for 22 plus in 5 out of 18 games. Now, granted, Mike Evans is the outlier here. Mike Evans had a higher rate of 22-point games than Jamar Chase, Puka Nacua, Nico Collins, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Malik Nabers. Like, go on down the list of people priced above him. But I do think that there's this component of like the high-end outcome on these players skews the perspective on them. And then the fact that you're constantly getting double-digit points, right? You look down a game log for Amon-Ra St. Brown, it's like 14 points, 16 points, 17, 18. Like, that feels so comfortable. But what you really want in order to win a tournament is those 35 to 40-point games. So to me, I think that this game can shoot out. I think this game has a broad range of outcomes. I think that the implied team total for the Lions is a joke in my mind. 22.5. There's no way that they score under 22.5 50% of the time if we played out this game over and over again. So that I'm with you on that. Like, I think that this skews to the upside from there. But I think that the way to build it is thinking about like, how does this game shoot out? Because in order for Amon-Ra St. Brown to put up 35 to 40, you probably need it to not be just the average game environment. So for me, and this is just how I'm looking at it, like Amon-Ra St. Brown doesn't stand out to me as much as a one-off, but I like him as part of like, okay, how do I see, like, is it Josh Jacobs on the other side? Is it Matthew Golden on the other side? How is this turning into like a 35 to 38 game? Because that's where you get like, hey, it's okay. They're scoring points. We can score points too, right? And the Lions open things up in that way. Jahmyr Gibbs to me is kind of one of these, especially if he goes overlooked. Like, the ceiling is there regardless of game script. And so he's one that I'm totally fine playing independent. And then I'd also be interested in you guys' thoughts on, like, to me, the drumbeat for Jameson Williams all offseason has been so positive and so tremendous. And he has so much upside in terms of like limited targets and what he can do with that. And it seems that his targets are going to elevate this year. And so he's one who I'd be less concerned about the actual game environment around him as well. Any thoughts on Jameson Williams?
Yeah, so I've been taking the opposite approach. This is very interesting to hear all this. I've been scared to death of this game. The stat I've got up here is the Lions only allowed 97 total yards on throws to the deep middle in 2024 with a 19% completion rate. That scares the crap out of me when I'm thinking about the way that Matt LaFleur likes to attack, and has me like sort of interested in Romeo Doubs because the Lions did give up a league high a number of receiving yards to the perimeter. But like for Matthew Golden, Jaden Reed, Tucker Kraft, like I'm a little bit nervous about this. And also I just think this Lions defense is really, really good. Aiden Hutchinson's numbers last year were truly insane. Like you can see on the chart here, he's on the far right all by himself. And then Zadarius Smith played really well too. They're getting healthy. I think if anything, we know that the coaching is going to be good on the defensive side of the ball. And I have a lot of respect for the Packers and what the new defensive coordinator did there last year. They were incredible at limiting yards before contact, which makes me a little bit nervous about Jahmyr Gibbs not getting that runway to be able to like then build the big plays. And then as for JMO, like we've got incredible cornerback play there from the cornerback one, and they also play a ton of like cloud coverage, zone coverage type looks that I have attributed a lot of the Jameson Williams efficiency boost to Ben Johnson. I think that Ryan's point is interesting. So like that makes me a little bit nervous. But yeah, as I've looked at this, like I see paths to it going under, and I see paths towards like Green Bay wanting to just like lean on Josh Jacobs in this spot, and that making it just kind of a gross game environment. But I want to hear, do you have any Jameson Williams thoughts on this matchup, Ryan?
I'll say first kind of generally in terms of the game environment and like how either of these receivers win. Yeah, fully agree with JM that it needs to be a shootout, but if it is, or at least if the Lions are trailing in this game, then I feel very confident in both of these wide receivers. In the Lions' only 2 losses last season, both St. Brown and Williams had over 50 routes per game. That is almost double the 26 routes per game that each of them averaged in this team's wins. So if they have to, then yes, we've seen this team is totally fine dropping back 50 plus times and winning in that way. St. Brown was at over 30 expected fantasy points per game in those games. Like, it would just be insane. Agreed that that's like the outcome you should be thinking about if you're playing either of them. Mm-hmm. As for JMO specifically, kind of why I gravitate more toward Gibbs and toward St. Brown is that with DC, Jeff Hafley, we've seen this Packers defense kind of be more of an underneath funnel. I don't have it right in front of me, but they were like top 5 in yards per game allowed on throws less than 10 yards downfield, like bottom 5 on throws more than 10 or more than 20 yards downfield. So it's not necessarily going to be like these deep explosives that I kind of think of Jameson Williams winning and getting there on. I think the better scenario is more like the Lions are behind. Maybe Josh Jacobs has scored 2 or 3 touchdowns by this point, and they just have to kind of spam all of these short area targets to St. Brown and Gibbs and for them to go win after the catch.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think like Gibbs especially stood out to me in terms of just thinking about like who here can score 40 points and is not going to be played. It doesn't feel like he's going to be a popular play at all. James, did you have anything else on this one, or are we good to move on to our third game here?
Yeah, good to move on.
All right, Panthers, Jags. I think this is the most obvious fantasy-friendly spot. Ryan, if you want to throw up the chart here, we've got like number 1 in the fantasy point data's schedule-adjusted chart versus both quarterback and running back. Number 1 and 2 are the Carolina Panthers and the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think the Jaguars' defense is going to be a lot different this year. Changed defensive coordinator, and he comes over from Green Bay and Miami, Anthony Campanile. Those defenses play way different. I think we're going to see way more too high safety, way less blitzing, dropping into coverage and forcing quarterbacks to like find the soft spot over the middle. That worries me a little bit about, Bryce Young not having Adam Thielen or Jalen Coker in this spot. And so that makes me wonder if it could become a grinded out game where it's a lot of just Chuba Hubbard trying to like win that way. And so I just wanted to bring that up because I think people are going to look at this game and it's like Trevor Lawrence, yes, way too cheap. Brian Thomas Jr., of course. Like Travis Hunter, we're excited for. Britton Strange feels like a good play. Tyrone McMillan is ridiculously cheap on FanDuel, and everybody's pretty enamored with him this draft season. So you just stack it, obviously, right? But like both of these defenses are really easy to beat on the ground. The Panthers were the only team even close to the Commanders last year. If you look at like being a run funnel, when games were close, how did offenses choose to attack? It was on the ground against Carolina. They have the same defensive coordinator this year. So I wanted to bring that up. JM, let me know what you think. Like, do you think that this could be a disappointment for people where it's not only is it that we could lean into the run, but also both quarterbacks have shown us a lot of volatility game to game. And you kind of need both of them to play well for it to become a shootout. Yeah,
and you talk about the stacking up the unknowns, right? So you still have a Ejiro Evero with the Panthers, but you have an infusion of talent. I mean, even just adding Derek Brown back is a big deal, right? So you could expect them to be better this year. And Anthony Campanile is, spoken highly of by people who know him and people around the league. And so there's a chance that this Jaguars defense is better this year. On top of that, Bryce Young has 2 games so far in his career over 263 passing yards. So like, what do you win when you win? What's the upside, right? And Bryce Young had 2 monster fantasy games across the last 3 weeks of the season last year, but both of those came with the aid of rushing touchdowns. And so I do think that, we saw it last year. Marvin Harrison Jr. was one of the highest owned wide receivers in week 1. And he was I think he was 7K last year. Malik Nabers was one of the highest owned wide receivers in week 1. Malik Nabers put up like 11 or 12 DraftKings points. Marvin Harrison Jr. put up 1.4 DraftKings points. Now the next week they both put up, Marvin Harrison Jr. put up over 32 and Malik Nabers put up over 25. So it can happen week 1, right? Just because it didn't happen for these guys week 1 doesn't mean it can't. But I do think we tend to see the field gravitate toward, similar to the Darnell Mooney point that you made, Gibbs, was like the cheaper wide receivers, there's so many of them, but who do people gravitate toward? They're going to gravitate toward Emeka Ibuka. They're going to gravitate toward Tet McMillan. And so I do think that there's volatility and uncertainty. And I think that this game has a chance to be overvalued in terms of overvalued to the upside. So this is the type of spot where for me, so the way I play DFS is I do mass multi-entry, but then most of my money is in single entry 3 max. But those single entry 3 max, I have a lot of times like 12 to 15 different rosters that I put into different size single entry 3 max. Not just like one roster, right? That I'm putting, or 3 rosters I'm putting in across the board. And so what I'll probably do is I'll have some stacks of this game in single entry 3 max, but I will be underweight the field and I will have less of my overall money in here than the field will have. And so I see this paths to the upside and I want to lean into those paths, but I also want to account for the fact that I think the chances of it hitting are lower than the field is going to assume. And so it's like, if it hits, I'm still positioned to hopefully get first place and take advantage of it. But if it misses, like, more of my money is off this spot than the field's money. And so I can benefit either way.
I think Chuba Hubbard, to me, stands out as like one of the best leverage plays, where like if you expect that or want to place a bet on it becoming this kind of a grinded out game, or a game where the passing pieces don't produce, that could come through Hubbard. And I also don't think he's going to be very popular.
Yeah, no,
you got more?
If I could just quickly on Chuba Hubbard, he is one of the most game script sensitive running backs in the league. And also what you win if you're right is actually pretty awesome. So like the spread is only 3.5 points. We already know that favorites aren't as likely to even cover the spread in week 1 compared to other weeks. And Hubbard, over the past 2 seasons in games that the Panthers have won, has averaged 101 rushing yards per game, 21.1 fantasy points per game. Those are only behind Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley. So yeah, if you want to make a bet at, as you said, on this game turning out that way, I think Hubbard is extremely appealing.
And am I reading it right that this will probably be like some of the top of the board rostered players? BTJ, T-Mac, Trevor?
Yeah, I would expect Lawrence and BTJ to be up there. I'm probably a little bit more optimistic kind of on the Jaguars passing game side of this than it sounds like you guys are, just because I have a lot of trust in Liam Cohen to say, okay, we're going to come out here in week 1 and like just show everybody what we can do. I don't necessarily think that he's going to be taking his foot off the gas. So yeah, I'm not really shying too much away from them. I also like some of the tertiary receivers in this game. The Brenton Stranges and the Diami Browns, guys that could asymmetrically benefit if Travis Hunter were to not play as much as we expect. I think both of those guys are really interesting in the larger field tournaments where you need to get more unique on this game. But yeah, those would be my overall thoughts on this.
Yep. All right, we're going to take a break and we'll get right back to BTJ, Brenton Strange, and some more Jaguars thoughts.
Critics are buzzing about the new season of Yellow Jackets.
This is not healthy.
Yellow Jackets' new season now streaming on the Paramount Plus with Showtime plan.
James to win, my guy. We've got our second segment here, individual matchups, 2 players that are like some of your favorite matchups on the board. And you have Brian Thomas Jr. as one of them. Not that he ever needs a good matchup. That is very exciting to hear. What are we looking at here with BTJ?
Yeah, so just looking at who is, I mean, we've already talked about Mike Evans. Like, there's a lot of guys that you could pick in week 1, but just in terms of who is going to be a focal point of the offense in a good matchup and a game environment that could take off, but they're also somewhat game environment independent. And so that's where I like BTJ all the way around. Is it's less about isolating the individual matchup against coverage type and all that, and more about like what is this guy's talent level? How is he going to be used? And what's the downside? Is there steep downside if this game plays out differently than we're expecting? And to me, Brian Thomas Jr., I was saying it last year when he was like 4,900, 5,200 on DraftKings. I kept saying he's going to be 6,500 before the end of the season. And it took way, way longer than it should have. But there down the stretch, he was like 6,500, 6,800, 6,900. This year, like, it won't surprise me if he's 7,900, 8,200 by the end of the season, and we're getting him at 6,800. So it's that thought of what are we paying for, and is this a guy who's going to be priced? Like, I think of this in fantasy drafts and best ball drafts as well. Are people going to be drafting this guy significantly higher next year? If so, then they're a good pick, right? Are people going to be paying more than this for Brian Thomas Jr. later in the year? If so, he's a good play in a good matchup in what has a good chance of being a good game environment. So yeah, all the way around, just from like a matchup and game environment perspective, I think he's a really sharp play this week.
I finished my rankings, and Jamar Chase was wide receiver 1, Nico Collins was 2, and Brian Thomas Jr. was 3. And so to see him at this price shocked me. And if he's not going to be one of the most popular plays on the week, then I think he's easily one of the best plays. And even if he is, he still is probably one of the best plays because, like JM said, he is pretty game script independent, and I think the matchup sets up well for him as well. Did you have anything on BTJ you wanted to add, Ryan, or should we get to James' second guy?
Yeah, we can just get to a second guy. I love BTJ too, but no need to dwell on it a ton.
The Panthers defense is just a seed. Like, it's so easy. The highest completion percentage allowed on middle deep targets, like that's BTJ. He could just eat like 200 yards easy.
Yeah. It could be one of those monster, 200. It could be one of those Amari Cooper. Like, what did he have? 11 catches for 265 yards and 2 score. Like, where did that come from? We could have one of those games from him this week. My other guy is David Njoku, and there's just so much that goes into this. But basically, I've laid out the stats, different place. I'm not finding them right now, but 2 years ago, Joe Flacco with the Browns in the same offense, right? And 6 starts, and Flacco plus David Njoku, they cost $9.6K in salary this week on DraftKings. They had a game of 20.9 points combined. A couple games in maybe it was one game in the 30s. Everything else was in the 40s and 50s. So if you think of that in terms of what you're paying for production, right? We used to pay 9.6K for Christian McCaffrey. And we did that thinking, every once in a while he's going to have a 20-point game, but most games he's going to have low to mid 30s. And every once in a while, he's going to pop up over 40. And he might have 150-point game per season. And you're saying that's worth it for the salary because we're locking in so many confident points for 9.6K in salary. Well, Flacco plus Njoku was one game of 20.9. That's very much like a Christian McCaffrey low-end score. A couple games in the 30s. I think it was one game in the 30s. And then the other 4 games in the 40s and 50s, right? If you look through a game log like that, you'd be like, well, this is phenomenal. On top of that, you have a game against the Bengals who, even through the defensive coordinator change and personnel changes, we still expect them to be bad against tight ends, and they should still be better on the perimeter than they are against tight ends. And then on top of that, you have a game environment where you would expect the Bengals to do well. Now, I know they've had their struggles against the Browns, and that's really the big sticking point here is last 6 games for Joe Burrow across 4 seasons against the Browns. I think they haven't topped 24 points scored in any of those 6 games. And so clearly the Browns have something on the Bengals, but this is still a spot where you would expect the Browns to be chasing points, and they're not playing for this season, right? Like, why is Flacco starting? Flacco's starting because you have to have some buy-in from the locker room that you're actually trying to win games. Kevin Stefanski, 2-time coach of the year. I don't think they're coming out here and just saying let's run the ball with Jerome Ford and Dylan Sampson and hope that we can win a low-scoring game. They're going to let Flacco rip it, and if he's ripping it, he clearly likes throwing the ball to David Njoku. So I think that David Njoku just has a great overall situation this week where most people aren't going to be looking at him as one of these key plays to think about on this slate.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all if he has 8 catches, 9 catches, something like that. And he's one of the top scorers. For redraft purposes, I have him ranked at tight end 9, just behind Tucker Kraft and Sam Laporta, just ahead of Tyler Warren, Jake Ferguson, but he could push much higher than that. That wouldn't surprise me at all. We could see huge pass volume in this spot. If anybody has any thoughts on him or Jerry Jeudy comparatively, I have them both ranked very high. The more that I dug into the matchup, it has clearly been tight ends that have crushed this defense in the past, but as a new defensive coordinator. So anybody have anything there, or should we just move on to our next player?
Just one quick thought on Jeudy for me is, we have a very small sample size of him looking like a great NFL wide receiver. And it's one game against his old team in the Broncos where he was highly motivated. And then a couple other games where he did pretty well with Jameis. And so, to me, I think that Jeudy is probably, we play at the slate 100 times. He's going to have some big games here, but I'm less confident in that. The one thing I do like, Al Golden, new defensive coordinator, is probably going to play a lot more man coverage, which would help Jeudy with his route running and with, those big plays downfield that you can hit with man coverage.
Love that. Did you have anything, Ryan?
Not really on Jeudy versus Njoku. I did just want to say that Flacco is kind of the guy I've been most surprised that I haven't seen popping in some of the early projections and ownership stuff around the industry. Yeah, I mean, in his starts with the Browns back in 2023, he was 4th best by pass rate over expectation, averaged 22 fantasy points per game, over 320 passing yards per game. He's just top 5 in all of these categories. And seemingly Vegas and a lot of the industry is just not projecting it that way. So I am in on the Njoku love, but also definitely in on the Flacco love in terms of. And
they were high pass rate over expectation with DTR, with Deshaun Watson, who couldn't play anymore. No matter who they had in there last year, they were throwing the ball, and I don't think that's going to change. I mean, this is Kevin Stefanski's offense still. I think they're going to let Flacco go there. And Flacco doesn't care; he's just throwing the ball downfield and tight windows. If it's an interception, whatever. He's just having fun out there.
This is the time to use the Browns. If you got them, smoke them while you got them. All right, so I've got two receivers I want to talk about. One is Malik Nabers. We're going to talk about him for DFS purposes, for the redraft people, and of course DFS as well. I want to talk about Ricky Pearsall for the Niners. So, a lot of steam pushing him up the board, but now Jauan Jennings looks like he's going to play. So where are we at with Slick Rick? I wanted to touch on a few matchup notes. Two notes here about the Seahawks defense. Seattle ranked 30th in defensive EPA per play action pass last year. They got shredded by Ben Johnson. They got shredded by Sean McVay. They got shredded by Matt LaFleur. And it was a lot of yards after the catch, not play action, deep passing. 220 yards after the catch against Detroit, 232 for LA, 144 for Green Bay. So that feels like a potential Ricky Pearsall note. I also wanted to note that the Seahawks were extremely adaptable on a week-to-week basis. Under Mike McDonald last year, they played a lot of man coverage and were aggressive, generally speaking, but they changed that up week to week. When they played Justin Jefferson, they're like, hell no, 7% man coverage against Minnesota compared to 25% in other games. Against the Dolphins receivers, literally not one snap charted as cover one. Against the Lions receivers, Falcons receivers, even Marvin Harrison Jr., we saw less man and press coverage from this defense. So I think they're clearly willing to adapt based on the competition. They played the Niners twice last year. First game, week 6, showed a ton of cover 6 and 2 high safety looks. Brandon Ayuk was limited to only 4 targets and 37 yards. I think that was the mission accomplished. But then Deebo Samuel feasts with lots of open space underneath. Fast forward to week 11, no Ayuk. Mike Mack dials up 34% man coverage, up from 21% in the first game. Cover 6 rate drops from 26% to 2%. Blitz rate up from 19% to 40%, the highest mark of the season in any game. Deebo Samuel is held to 22 yards after the big game the first time. Jauan Jennings feasts. More press, man coverage, that's his thing. 1v1, 10 catches on 11 targets for 91 yards and a score. So my question to you guys, what do we see from Mike Mack in week 1 after a whole offseason to plan for the Niners? You got to worry about CMC. George Kittle, Jauan Jennings is back. I don't think that Ricky Pearsall is near the top of that list. Is that a fair read?
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, you're probably thinking like top down here, right? Like you don't want to get beat over the top. And so there's a component there of like top down first as the first priority. And then beyond that, then you're saying like, okay, who are the individual weapons, right? So I could see Ricky Pearsall kind of feasting on some underneath throws. I'm not like a huge believer in Ricky Pearsall as a talent. Like I think he was a questionable first round pick. That's my take. But at the same time, he's had these couple of big games where you kind of look at it and you're like, ooh, but he can do that, And so, yeah, I've been back and forth on him this week and haven't really resolved my thoughts on him yet. Definitely gonna have some exposure. My question is how much. So yeah, I appreciate your kind of detailed analysis there, and I'm still working through my thoughts on it.
I know Matt Harmon really liked his work versus man coverage at the end of the year, specifically against Detroit. He absolutely shredded them. And so I think that that's intriguing in this matchup. I think Seattle's DBs, while good, they're sort of bigger physical types. And I think that he's somebody who could create some separation in the spot.
Yeah. So I want to say I'm very impressed that you feel like you have a read on this Seahawks defense, because that is one spot where I just kind of really struggled this week to feel like I had a take. But I will add something here, which is kind of it's more so the usage between Jauan Jennings and Pearsall that I'm kind of thinking about and questioning. We have kind of had this debate on various shows over the offseason, you and myself, Jacob, but I will definitely concede, even as like a Jauan Jennings bull, that we have seen Kyle Shanahan kind of say in the past with Brandon Ayuk after an extended holdout, hey buddy, we're not going to throw you the ball for the first 6 weeks of the season. So I do think, like more so than any other matchup note, if Shanny just kind of wants to prove a point here, then yeah, I mean, you couldn't really ask for a better Pearsall blow-up spot. Yeah, I don't know. It's very funny to me that this whole offseason drama resulted in $3 million in incentives that was just recently announced this morning or last night or whenever that was. So yeah, I'll admit I'm Pearsall curious, at least for the early season, just to see what it is that Shanahan wants to prove this time.
Yeah, I thought about you for sure with the projections and the research that you've done on like these early season holdouts. And I definitely think that comes into play here. It feels like a good spot, and he's really, really cheap. So definitely I'm fine starting him in season long and in DFS. As for Malik Nabers, I think this could be a huge game. We talked about earlier why we think that the Giants will probably prefer to attack on the ground, but they are projected to get down. So if they are down and they're trailing, they're chasing points here. Both Nabers' season highs in targets, 18, and air yards, 208. came in this matchup last year. It's a little bit different. We've got a healthy Marshawn Lattimore, rookie round 2 pick Trey Amos. So this may make it a tougher test for receivers this year, but I don't really worry about that when it comes to Malik Nabers. And I don't think the Commanders have enough pass rush to create pressure. And you can't ask DBs to try to cover Nabers for 3 or more seconds. And I think that's kind of what we're looking at here is Washington was near the very bottom in pressure rate last year. They blitzed a ton, 8th highest blitz rate, and still they ranked 30th in pressure rate on blitzes. They had the league's highest explosive pass rate allowed when blitzing. And then if you look at Russ and his tendencies, he was very aggressive in pushing the ball deep last year when blitzed to George Pickens. And then when he was blitzed and not pressured, like the Pickens target share, yard route run, all that just goes through the roof. So I'm looking at Nabers as somebody who's probably going to not be as popular as some of these other top guys. They don't have a big implied total. And I just think he's like an excellent GPP play because he could pop for 50.
Yeah, I'll help in here on that. And, it's funny how results oriented our thoughts can be as humans, right? Like how many 1-score games did the Bengals lose last year? And now they're nobody's pick to, be in the playoffs. Or it's like, maybe they're the 7th seed. Maybe they squeak in. Like how many 1-score games did the Commanders win last year? And, and then they make this run to the NFC Championship game and they're looked at in a totally different light. Like this is still probably the 7th or 8th or 9th best team in the NFC, right? Or they're in that group of like the 5th to 9th best teams. And part of the issue is the defensive line and the secondary. Like Marshawn Lattimore is not Marshawn Lattimore anymore, in my opinion. Furthermore, Marshawn Lattimore was drafted specifically because he played in the NFC South against, at the time, Julio Jones, Mike Evans, these big-bodied receivers that he could be that physical guy to go against them. And to me, like that doesn't match up as well against somebody like Malik Nabers. And so, yeah, I do look at Malik Nabers as a guy who can win in this matchup. So my only concern then is, does this game environment go a different direction, right? With the Giants defensive line, are the Giants trying to run the ball against Washington and just kind of make this a 20-17 type of game? And so for me, it's like, if I'm playing Jaden Daniels this week, I'm playing Malik Nabers because I want to tell that story of this game being back and forth. If I'm playing Malik Nabers, I could play him independent of other players from this game. I could play him alongside Jaden Daniels. I could play him with Russell Wilson. There's a lot of ways to play Malik Nabers, but I do think that the branching out to how you would play Jaden Daniels comes down to me, like you want to bet on the game environment going a particular direction, and Malik Nabers is probably a big part of that. So yeah, the matchup doesn't scare me. The only concern I have is game environment. And so I'll have definitely have some Malik Nabers exposure this week in DFS. I don't think he's going to be a primary piece for me, but he's going to be one of these guys who it's like, I definitely want to have enough of him that I can benefit to the upside, because the upside is who could be the guy that you had to have in order to win a tournament. He's one of those guys.
Yeah. And I think he does engineer like more and more upside for Jane Daniels. It makes so much sense to combine them. Ryan, your 2 guys here were Michael Penix and Josh Downs. We already talked about Penix in that game environment. I'm very curious to hear what you have on Josh Downs. I am just chomping at the bit to ever have an opportunity to play Josh Downs.
Yeah, anytime we can get the Josh Downs steam in here, we got to do it, of course. So this is less so like a schematic take or anything like that. This is kind of just, it's a little bit vibes, but it's also just like thinking about this game and how it could go. So I don't know about you guys, but it feels like every single week this offseason, I have read a beat report that is just skewering the Dolphins secondary and these corners especially. Like it does not sound good. Storm Duck is a real name of a real Dolphins corner. They are playing a day 3 rookie at nickel corner in the slot. So to me, that's just like, okay, we need to get some pieces of this Colts passing game. And Downs is the one I'm just most interested. I mean, I've given all the Josh Downs stats a million times, but top 4 in targets per route run last year. He was the wide receiver 17 in games without Anthony Richardson. There are all of these stats about how basically Daniel Jones is a much better thrower on like horizontal routes, which is what Downs has commanded a lot of his targets on over his career. So yeah, I really like Downs from like an individual matchup perspective. We've seen the Dolphins also kind of funnel everything underneath kind of similarly to the Packers. So the low ADOT stuff could also help Downs out, but he's kind of the rare like slot receiver that can also win vertically, that can also do it on the big plays, which is kind of what makes me not dismiss him for DFS like I might for some of these guys in tournaments that you might say are low upside. I don't think that applies to Downs whatsoever. So yeah, I really like him here. I think he can just run all over these defensive backs. And yeah, it's pretty much that simple, that I just have zero confidence in this Dolphins secondary.
I love it. I have Downs one spot behind Jamison Williams, which feels kind of high, but I do think that the game environment could set up real nicely here. My expectation is we're going to see them try to just grind Jonathan Taylor into 28 touches here. But if it goes a different direction, I love it. I would throw out a few names. I'm nervous about Matthew Golden, Roma Dunze, and then Rashid Shaheed is going to be JM's guy. We'll throw Darnell Mooney in there as well. Is Downs ahead of all of them for you, Ryan? I do have him ahead of all those players.
Yeah, I would say he's ahead of all those names you just said.
Love it. All right, JM, talk to us about Rashid Shaheed. The people here are fans.
Yeah, let me talk Downs real quickly first, because everything that was said there about the Dolphins, I'm pretty sure that Mike McDaniel is the odds-on favorite to be the first coach fired this season, betting favorite, and it's a weird situation where I listen to a ton of press conferences, interviews, and whatnot, and a lot of times it's just to get, I've said before, like I listen to him on 2x speed. I'll listen to 10 or 15 hours or something, and it's to catch like 3 or 4 key nuggets, but it's key nuggets that other people don't have, right? Like a few weeks ago, there was the question of like, is Travis Hunter playing enough on offense this year to be justified as a draft pick? Well, Brian Thomas Jr. said in an interview, they were asked about like facing Travis Hunter in practice. And he was like, I haven't faced off against him yet this year. Dude, if this guy's your number one corner, you're going to put him against your number one receiver to get him ready, right? Like clearly they're getting him ready for offense, not defense. And so Jalen Ramsey was on the Pivot podcast, and he was talking about, leaving Miami and going to Pittsburgh. And he didn't throw any shade on Mike McDaniel, but he did say many times things like, I wanted to be on a team where the players respect the coach. I want to be on a team where the players want to play for the coach. And so like, these are hints of how he felt in Miami and how the locker room feels in Miami. The vibes, like the word vibes has been thrown around so much around Miami, of like the vibes are off this year. So going back to another like press conference or interview, Derrick Henry was asked last year what he watches for on film. And he said he watches for effort. He watches for the guy who's not giving maximum effort, because that's the guy he wants to target when he gets in the open field to try to run that guy over. Because if he can break that guy's will, then that makes the game that much easier deeper into the game, right? And so we saw Derrick Henry have these huge games in the AFC South against the Jags, against the Jags, against the Colts late in the season, where those teams are out of the playoffs. Those guys didn't want to get in his way, right? So the question is like, are the Dolphins already in that headspace and mindset? Like, is this already a team that even with the excitement of week one is already kind of checked out and like not bought in? And if that's the case, then this is a defense to attack early in the season and throughout the season. And so, yeah, I do think that there's a very clear opportunity for it to be a Jonathan Taylor game. And I'm going to count for that on a lot of my rosters in DFS this week, I think. But I also think that if we're throwing, Josh Downs is the guy we're throwing to. It's kind of like having Wan'Dale Robinson, except able to actually do something after the catch, And so I always preach against just taking floor plays. But what I like about Josh Downs is he's not just a floor play. He can do something with the ball in his hands. He can catch the ball downfield, so he can hit for those ceiling outcomes. So, yeah, I think Josh Downs is really sharp. My Rashid Shaheed call is like, where are people putting too much certainty, right? Where do people just look at a team and say, oh God, that team's going to be awful. I can't even think about them. I can't even consider them in DFS this week. And that Saints game, actually the Saints and Cardinals side of that game, become very interesting, because it's going to be one of these games that's sort of invisible to a lot of DFS players, where they're going to be like, no, the Saints are going to be so bad this year. Like, I can't take that on. And no, I don't expect this to be like the way people thought about the Texans 2 years ago or the Commanders last year, because those had CJ Stroud and Jaden Daniels, like potentially ascendant rookie quarterbacks coming in. Spencer Rattler's not that, but there is opportunity for them to be better than awful, right? And if they're better than awful, then on a concentrated offense, somebody like Rashid Shaheed, who can put up 100 plus yards on 4 targets and could actually command 8 or 9 targets, he just stands out to me as one of these guys who, in large field tournaments and DFS, nobody's going to be on him. If you are in that 4,600 price range, you're going to Emeka Egbuka And then if you're going to try to get different, you're going to go Josh Downs. And then there's Rashid Shaheed is kind of this third guy there that people are like not even going to think about this week. And so he's one of these guys who I'm not putting him on tighter builds. I don't think, smaller field, trying to beat 2,000 rosters to get to first place. Well, you don't need to take on that level of risk in that type of tournament. But as you're trying to beat 10,000 rosters, 20,000 rosters to get to first place where all the money is, that's where you start thinking about somebody like Rashid Shaheed, who can put up 25 to 30 points and nobody's rostering him. So he's kind of one of my main deep cuts, lower price deep cuts this week.
Love that. Number 1 in fantasy points per target among qualified receivers since entering the NFL, Rashid Shaheed.
Yeah, I forget who said this recently. I wish I could give him credit, but it might have been Chris Sims. Somebody was saying like, our perception of Rashid Shaheed would be so different if he were on, say, the Chiefs. It'd be like, oh, is this guy a Pro Bowler? Is this guy is this one of the best wide receivers in the NFL? He's in a horrible situation with a bad team, but like this dude is good, And I think people overlook that because of where he is and what surrounds him on that team.
Yep, we're doing some deep calls for you here. Shaheed, Josh Downs, Darnell Mooney I threw out earlier. These are all players who, if you're trying to beat 20,000 people in DFS, are definitely viable plays because they're not going to be people that many gravitate towards. And then also if they hit, like what's their path to production? It's downfield targets. It's their team falls behind and is throwing a ton. So I think Shaheed's a great call out there. I do have him ranked 1 spot ahead of Mooney at wide receiver 46 this week. So I think he's a viable flex play too. The other guys I was going to throw out were really random, obscure guys here, but it's Romeo Doubs for the note that I mentioned earlier that Detroit was so good at taking away the middle of the field. And if we do get the unexpected Green Bay playing from behind type of situation here, and they're throwing a lot, I think Doubs is the guy that they trust the most. If it's not working through Matthew Golden and he could get some downfield looks, similar type of profile in terms of the way that he gets his targets down the field. And then really obscure one here is Isaac Tesla. Is anybody with me, or is this just insanity? How does he score his points, if at all? Freaking touchdowns and 40-yard plays and stuff like that. Like that's the skill set in a projected shootout here against a bunch of small cornerbacks. That sounds good to me.
Yeah, a lot of times you win the Millie Maker or one of these like contests where you have to beat 40 or 50,000 rosters. You win that by finding a 3K wide receiver who puts up 20 to 25 points. Because now all of a sudden you're getting the production of like a 5 or 6K wide receiver, and you're saving a ton in salary, and you're able to take on a lot more certainty elsewhere. So Tesla certainly fits in that bucket. You look at Tim Patrick had a 22-point PPR DraftKings game last year, and then a bunch of like 5, 7, 9 games. But I expect Tesla to be in that same role. And first off, Tim Patrick is actually good, but I think Tesla is probably even a little bit better, right? They got rid of Tim Patrick and they're moving Tesla in. Now, part of that calculus is he's a younger guy and all that, but I do think that he has that skill set to put up 1 or 2 20 to 25 point games this year. And if you're getting it at 3K and 0 ownership, that's a massive separator. So to me, that's one that the larger the tournament field, the more you gravitate towards something like that. But yeah, certainly if you're looking like Millie Maker or one of these other like super large field tournaments, he's the type of play you like literally have to be gravitating toward, because you have to build some rosters that say not what's the smartest on paper thing, but like what can happen. And if it does, now unlocks the rest of my roster to be able to do a lot more than everybody else is doing.
Let's go. All right, Ryan, who's your deep cut here?
Yeah, I kind of referred to them earlier, but it's going to be Brenton Strange, and I'll toss Diami Brown in here as well. So kind of to take everybody back and like start from 20,000 feet. This offseason, I did this giant study where I was basically asking, okay, what is the best way to take advantage of schematic matchups in DFS and fantasy football in general? And what I basically found was that if you can be at the extreme high end of a certain schematic matchup, like you're going to say, okay, this team is likely to be top 5% in cover 3 or in whatever the matchup is. If you have that plus a player that has a boost to their targets per route run against whatever that shell is, it does increase your odds of having a ceiling game out of that player, which I had just defined as 20 fantasy points per game or more. Anyone that's interested can go read that article. It's called Why Coverage Matchups Matter in Fantasy Football. That's free over on fantasypoints.com. But basically the biggest, or one of the biggest takeaways from that in terms of this week's slate is, as we've talked about, we can be pretty sure that the Panthers are going to play a ton of cover 3 with Avero returning, right? And we have seen historically over the entirety of last season, both Dyami Brown and Brenton Strange were both much more efficient and were targeted much more often against these cover 3 shells. Yes, they are kind of fringy plays. They're guys that I want to mix into these game stacks or kind of throw in large field tournaments, as JM is kind of talking about, where you want to get that really cheap receiver to put up that bigger score that's going to propel you to a top 0.01% finish. But I do think that Brown and Strange are decent options for that. I already mentioned that, we're all Travis Hunter bulls here, but if that ends up not working out in week 1, it kind of helps both of these guys as well. The kind of drumbeat has been insane, specifically on Dyami Brown. This team has not shut up about how much they love Dyami Brown the entire offseason. So this is a spot I want to attack in week 1. All the on paper stuff looks amazing as well. Panthers top 5 in schedule adjusted to opposing tight ends. So those two guys are kind of my deep flag plants this week.
Love it. Yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting ways to get different at tight end this week. I think a lot of people are just going to be fish like me and just click Brock Bowers because there's a lot of awesome cheap plays, and it's pretty freaking easy to just fit Brock Bowers in there and feel good about that. I think anywhere you can find a tight end play that you have conviction on that might break to the upside, that is worth noting. And as Ryan pointed out, we feel good about the matchup here. Anything else, boys? We're good to sign off?
Yeah, good to sign up on my end.
Great show.
We're all set.
That's what we're looking for here, is to provide a bit of a matchup edge here, help you with some DFS, help you with some season-long start-sit decisions as well, and occasionally bring in a bright and beautiful guest like JM to win to help us learn a little bit more about thinking about football and matchups and all this crazy stuff about this game that we love so much. For Ryan, for JM, for me, thank you so much. This is Beyond the Box Score. JM, one last time, tell people where they can find you.
Yeah, just head over to oneweekseason.com. Everything's free week 1. So that includes optimizers, sims, projections, all of our strategy content, player pools, all that. So check it out, see if it's a fit for you. If it's not a fit for you, which is great. There's so many great content sites out there. And so, check us out, and we'll see you at the top of the leaderboards this weekend.
Love that. I was going to say love the humility, but then he ended with, we'll see at the top of the leaderboards. But that's just confidence. That's just confidence. That's not hubris. I believe it. I've been following this man. I know that that's real. I love the humility of James to not try to sell you on it or anything. I am going to try to sell you here. I'm going to fill in for Dan, the man, as plug God. Please like the video. Please give us a 5-star review, all that good stuff. You know what we're doing. Ryan and I will be back with more good content for you on Thursday. And then Dan and Adam and I will be here on Monday to break down everything we saw from a fun week 1. Thank you guys so much. See ya.